The afternoon bell rang across the campus at San Isidro National High School, releasing students like a shaken bottle of soda, laughter fizzing down hallways, footsteps echoing across corridors, conversations spilling into the courtyard. Among the crowd was Marco Reyes, whose laughter could be heard even before he appeared. Marco had the kind of presence teachers described as sunny. He greeted guards by name, waved at seniors he barely knew, and could sit beside anyone during lunch without feeling out of place. He remembered birthdays, favorite snacks, even who liked extra chili sauce on fish balls. But beneath that warmth was something fragile. Marco feared silence. Silence meant being alone, and being alone meant thinking, and thinking meant wondering whether anyone would still choose him if he stopped trying so hard. Not far behind the dispersing crowd walked Adrian Velasco. If Marco was sunlight, Adrian was shade beneath a tree, quiet, steady, and rarely noticed unless someone chose to stop and sit. Adrian kept his hands in his pockets, earphones unplugged, but worn anyway like a signal. Please don't talk to me. He walked home alone, ate lunch alone, worked on group projects alone whenever teachers allowed it. Students had labels for him: snob, creep, weird, ghost. Adrian answered none of them, because Adrian had once tried. In grade 4, Adrian had forced himself into laughter that didn't feel natural. He remembered approaching a group of boys playing tag. "Can I join?" They had shrugged. He ran when they ran, laughed when they laughed, but every movement felt like wearing someone else's skin. Later that week, he heard whispers. "He's awkward. Why does he talk like that? He's creepy." No one shouted it. No one bullied him outright. But exclusion can be quiet and still sting. Adrian went home that day, sat on his bed, and asked himself a question no child should need to ask. Why do I need to change just to exist beside them? The next morning, he stopped trying. Marco spotted Adrian sitting alone beneath the acacia tree near the covered court, sketching geometric shapes in a notebook. Marco slowed. He had tried talking to Adrian before, small greetings, casual jokes, invitations to group activities. Adrian always answered politely, briefly, then returned to silence. Marco's friends, meanwhile, waved him over. "Marco, come here," shouted Jared, the unofficial leader of their circle. Marco ran. He always ran when called. Marco's circle was loud, confident, and socially magnetic. They dominated lunch tables, group chats, and sometimes entire classrooms with their energy. Marco thrived in that environment. Or so he thought. That afternoon, they gathered behind the gym. "Hey, Marco," Jared said, tossing him a notebook. "Can you finish the math assignment? You're good at that stuff." "Sure," Marco replied instantly. "And Marco," added Kyle, "can you talk to Ms. Delgado about our project deadline? She likes you." Marco nodded again. "And Marco," another voice chimed, "can you?" He kept saying yes, because saying yes meant belonging. Days passed. Requests piled. Homework, favors, errands, explanations to teachers. One evening, Marco scrolled through their group chat. Memes, inside jokes, plans for a weekend hangout. No one had invited him. Marco hesitated before typing. "Marco, are we still meeting Saturday?" The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. Minutes later, the conversation continued, ignoring his message. Marco stared at the screen, longer than necessary. A strange heaviness settled in his chest. The next day during lunch, Marco approached the group. "Hey, about Saturday?" "Oh," Jared said casually, "we thought you'd be busy." "Busy? You always are." Marco blinked. "But I'm only busy when we ask you to do stuff. Kyle finished. Laughter followed. Not cruel, just careless. Marco laughed too, but something cracked. Later that day, Marco sat alone on the bleachers, picking at the label of his water bottle. Adrian happened to pass by. He paused, not out of curiosity, but recognition. He knew that posture, the slumped shoulders of someone discovering their place in a hierarchy. Adrian started to walk away. Then Marco spoke. Adrian. Adrian stopped. Marco hesitated before continuing. Can I ask you something? Adrian nodded once. Marco swallowed. Do you ever feel lonely? Adrian studied him, not with pity, but with precision. Yes. Marco seemed surprised by the honesty. But, Adrian added, lonely and alone aren't the same. Marco frowned. What do you mean? Adrian sat beside him, leaving comfortable distance. You can be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. The words landed heavier than Marco expected. Marco laughed weakly. I think my friends just forgot about me. Adrian tilted his head. Do they forget you? He asked. Or remember you only when useful? The question stung. Marco's instinct was to defend them. They're not like that. Adrian shrugged. I don't know them. I only know patterns. Marco looked at him. What patterns? You run when they call, Adrian said calmly. They don't run when you call. Silence stretched. Marco felt as if someone had turned on a light in a room he didn't know was dark. That's harsh, Marco muttered. Yes, Adrian replied. But harsh doesn't mean false. Marco exhaled slowly. Why are you telling me this? Adrian considered. Because pretending not to notice would be easier. But you asked. Marco laughed softly. You really don't care what people think, do you? I used to, Adrian admitted. It was exhausting. They sat watching clouds drift. I thought being friendly meant being liked, Marco said. Adrian shook his head. Being friendly makes you approachable. Being valued requires boundaries. Marco repeated the word. Boundaries. I am comfortable alone, Adrian said. Not because I hate people. Because I choose when they enter my space. Marco stared ahead. I don't think I've ever chosen. That evening, Marco replayed conversations in his mind. Every yes. Every favor. Every moment he laughed along to avoid discomfort. For the first time, Marco did nothing. He didn't message the group, didn't volunteer answers, didn't run errands. The silence that once scared him now felt informative. No one checked on him. Days later, Marco found himself again beneath the acacia tree. Adrian was there, reading. Marco approached. Is this seat taken? Adrian glanced up. No. Marco sat. They didn't talk for 5 minutes. Marco expected awkwardness. Instead, he felt relief. Their interactions became routine. Studying quietly. Walking partway home together. Occasional conversations that felt less like performance and more like exchange. One afternoon, Marco asked, Do you ever wish you were different? Adrian closed his notebook. I wish people understood difference without needing explanation. Marco smiled. That sounded like something from a book. I read many. Eventually, Marco's old group noticed the change. Marco, why are you always with Velasco now? Jared asked. Marco felt the familiar pull, the desire to appease. But Adrian's words echoed. Do you choose? Marco answered carefully. Because he listens. The group exchanged glances. Kyle smirked. You've gotten weird. Marco shrugged. Maybe I just got honest. Later, Marco recounted the interaction. Adrian listened. Did it bother you? Adrian asked. A little, Marco admitted. But not as much as I thought. Adrian nodded. That's growth. Marco grinned. You talk like a guidance counselor. I prefer silent observer. One golden afternoon, Marco spoke softly. You know, when we first talked, I thought you were mean. That is a common review, Adrian replied. Marco laughed. But you were the first person who didn't try to keep me comfortable. Adrian looked at him. Comfort without truth is fragile. Marco nodded. Thank you for the slap. Adrian almost smiled. Marco eventually understood something simple, yet profound. Belonging is not measured by how many people call your name, but by how many people would notice its absence. And Adrian learned something too. Solitude chosen is peace, but companionship chosen is warmth. Weeks turned into months. They were still different. Marco remained expressive, talkative, socially bright. Adrian remained quiet, introspective, selectively engaged. But difference stopped being distance. Instead, it became balance. Marco brought Adrian into moments of laughter. Adrian brought Marco into moments of reflection. One late afternoon, they walked home under orange skies. Do you think we would have been friends earlier? Marco asked. Adrian thought. No. Why? You needed to lose noise, Adrian said. And I needed to trust sound again. Marco smiled at that. They reached the fork where their paths separated. Marco waved. See you tomorrow. Adrian nodded. Tomorrow. Marco walked away feeling lighter, not because he had more friends, but because he finally had a real one. And Adrian watched him go, realizing that solitude had taught him self-understanding, but friendship had taught him connection without compromise. Beneath the fading sunlight, two students continued along different roads, now linked not by necessity, popularity, or convenience, but by chosen understanding. And sometimes that is the quietest form of belonging.